You are standing in a city that calls itself order. Stone streets stretch beneath your feet, clean, measured, deliberate. Laws are carved into marble. Magistrates sit wrapped in white, speaking of balance, justice, civilization. This is Rome as it wants to be remembered, calm, rational, disciplined. An empire built on rules, not rage. And for a moment, you almost believe it. Because Rome does allow queens to rule. It signs treaties with women. It recognizes thrones held by female hands. As long as those hands remain open, as long as they offer loyalty, tribute, and silence, as long as power is borrowed, never claimed. The illusion breaks the moment a woman refuses. Not rebellion, refusal. The moment she governs without permission, negotiates as an equal, or commands without bowing, Rome no longer sees a ruler. It sees a mistake that must be corrected. And Rome does not correct women the same way it corrects men. For male enemies, Rome offers war, chains, or death. For female rulers who will not submit, Rome designs something more precise, more symbolic, more cruel. Their bodies become messages. Their families become pressure points. Their names are reshaped into warnings meant to travel farther than any army. This is how Roman order truly works. It does not simply defeat defiant women. It dismantles them publicly. It turns their authority into humiliation, their lineage into leverage, their memory into a lesson every other ruler is meant to learn. Rome did not fear female power because it was weak. It feared it because it existed at all. And when Rome decided a woman had ruled too freely, too boldly, too visibly, it did not just take her crown. It rewrote her existence so no one else would dare to follow her path. Rome never wrote this rule down. You will not find it carved into stone or preserved in legal codes. No senator ever stood in the forum and announced it aloud. Yet every governor understood it. Every general enforced it. Every client king depended on it. A woman could rule, but only on Roman terms. In Roman thinking, power was masculine by nature. Authority belonged to men because Rome believed discipline, command, and violence flowed from male order. A woman exercising power was tolerated only when it appeared controlled, contained, and ultimately borrowed from Rome itself. A queen was acceptable if she ruled like a placeholder, a caretaker, a symbol Rome could point to and say, she governs because we allow it. These were the client queens. Women placed on thrones by Roman approval. Women who signed treaties written in Latin they did not control. Women whose armies were small, whose borders were watched, whose survival depended on continued obedience. Their power was conditional. Their crowns were loans, and everyone understood that one wrong decision could trigger removal. Independent female rulers were something else entirely. They did not ask permission. They expanded territory. They minted coins with their own faces. They negotiated as equals. They spoke to Rome not as daughters or allies, but as rivals. In Roman ideology, this was not simply political opposition. It was defiance of the natural order. And Rome does not negotiate with defiance in women. When male rulers resisted Rome, they were treated as enemies in war. Their defiance fit Roman expectations. Men fought. Men rebelled. Men challenged authority with force, and Rome responded with force in return. There was a brutal logic to it. But when a woman refused to submit, Rome did not interpret it as warfare. It interpreted it as insubordination, as disobedience, as something that had to be corrected, not conquered. This distinction mattered, because insubordination does not require rules of war. It requires discipline, punishment, re-education. Rome believed a woman who ruled independently was not just a political threat, but a social contamination, a dangerous example that could spread. If one woman could rule without permission, others might try. And that possibility frightened Rome far more than armies ever did. Roman law offered these women no protection. Foreign rulers already stood outside the circle of citizenship, but foreign women were further removed still. Roman legal systems did not recognize their dignity, their bodily autonomy, or their authority. They were not shielded by trial rights. They were not protected from public punishment. They were not entitled to mercy. Once captured, a female ruler ceased to be a sovereign in Roman eyes. She became property, evidence, a lesson. Roman punishments for these women were never random. They were designed, gendered, symbolic. Rome sought not only to defeat them, but to reverse them, to strip away the markers of power and replace them with markers of submission. Authority was undone through exposure. Command was undone through humiliation. Legacy was undone through family. Their femininity was weaponized against them. Public punishment reminded audiences that this body was not meant to rule. That power resting in female hands was temporary, unnatural, and punishable. Rome did not merely remove queens from history. It reshaped their fall into a warning so vivid it could not be forgotten. This is the part history often softens. Textbooks will tell you Rome absorbed provinces, that it pacified regions, that it replaced unstable leadership with order. What they do not tell you is that Rome used women's bodies as political theater, that it turned female defiance into spectacle precisely because it understood the psychological impact. To rule, as a woman without Roman permission, was not just to lose a war. It was to violate an empire's idea of how the world was supposed to work. And Rome always corrected violations publicly. If you are still listening at this point, you are already choosing discomfort over comfort, because the easy version of Rome is far more pleasant than the real one. Many people prefer the marble statues, the speeches, the illusion of civilization. They do not want to confront what that civilization required. If you find yourself hesitating to subscribe, ask yourself why. Is it because this history unsettles you? Because it refuses to stay neat and admirable? If so, say it out loud in the comments. Explain why you would rather keep the sanitized version. This channel exists for those willing to look directly at the punishment beneath the power. And what comes next is where Rome stopped pretending altogether. When Rome realized it could not control these women quietly, it changed tactics. It dragged them into the light. Rome understood something ancient and ruthless about power. What is seen lasts longer than what is merely known. Death ends a threat. Visibility multiplies it. So when a female ruler refused to submit, when she ruled too boldly, spoke too freely, or stood too tall, Rome did not hide her defeat. It staged it. This is where the triumph enters. Officially, the triumph was a celebration of victory, a sacred procession granted by the Senate, a reward for generals who expanded Rome's borders. But when defiant queens were involved, the triumph became something else entirely. It was not just a parade. It was a theater of correction. The city was prepared like a stage, streets cleared, temples adorned, crowds summoned. Rome wanted witnesses. Rome always wanted witnesses. At the center of this spectacle stood contrast. Roman generals rode high in chariots, armored, crowned, elevated above the crowd. They embodied masculine authority, controlled, victorious, divine in posture. And then, behind them, Rome placed the women it had defeated. Not hidden, not spared. Displayed. Their status was stripped piece by piece, but never all at once. Rome was careful. A queen was not dressed in rags unless Rome wanted to signal complete erasure. Often she was dressed in excess instead, royal garments weighed down with jewelry, gold layered upon gold, crowns still visible, not as honor but as mockery. Power turned into costume, wealth transformed into burden. Chains were added deliberately, not always iron, sometimes gold, heavy, conspicuous, designed not just to restrain but to exhaust. Every step became labor. Every movement became struggle. The body that once commanded now existed to be watched. This was intentional. Rome understood that the crowd needed to see the fall happen in real time. A woman who once ruled now walking slowly, constrained, exposed to thousands of staring eyes. Her authority dissolved not by decree, but by duration, hour after hour of forced visibility. The difference between male captives and female captives was unmistakable. Defeated kings were symbols of conquest. Defeated queens were symbols of correction. Men were marched to show Rome's military dominance. Women were marched to show what happens when the natural order is violated. Their humiliation was not a side effect of victory, it was the message itself. Rome obsessed over visibility because visibility reshapes memory. A private execution disappears into rumor. A public humiliation embeds itself into generations. Children remembered these images. Foreign envoys recorded them. Allied rulers watched and recalculated their loyalty. And for women, the humiliation went further. The gaze was not neutral. It was invasive, sexualized. Roman crowds were encouraged to look, to judge, to consume the image of fallen authority embodied in a female form. The message was unmistakable. This body does not command. This body is commanded. Even silence was weaponized. A queen who spoke was defiant. A queen forced into silence became compliant spectacle. Rome understood that stripping voice was as important as stripping power. This was not chaos. This was choreography. Rome believed that breaking a woman publicly broke her people privately. Because if a queen could be reduced, her followers would internalize the lesson. Resistance would feel futile. Loyalty would feel safer. Fear would travel faster than legions ever could. And Rome was right, most of the time. What you are hearing now is not the glorious version of the triumph taught in passing. This is the part that lingers underneath the marble. If this perspective unsettles you, stay with it. That discomfort is the point. If you value histories that refuse to look away from power's cruelty, this is where you belong. And if you don't, if you feel the urge to turn away, ask yourself why, and say it openly in the comments. Because Rome wanted silence. And silence is how this worked for so long. What comes next is what happened when humiliation was not enough. What happened next is easiest to understand through one woman Rome refused to let disappear. Before Rome touched her, she was already dangerous, not because of her armies, but because of her name. You are in Alexandria, where power does not belong to generals alone, but to bloodlines, dynasties, and divine inheritance. She is young, but she is royal. A daughter of the Ptolemaic house, raised in a court where queens are not ornaments but rulers. Her authority is not symbolic. It is political, religious, and public. Coins bear her image. Crowds recognize her lineage. Soldiers know her claim. And Rome notices. Her crime is not open war. It is alignment. Choice. She places herself on the wrong side of Rome's internal struggle. She supports resistance when Rome demands compliance. She refuses to disappear quietly into obscurity while men negotiate her future over maps and wine. That refusal is enough. Rome does not rush to kill her. That would be wasteful. Instead, it captures her carefully. She is taken alive, not because Rome fears her, but because Rome understands her value as an image. A royal woman is far more useful breathing than dead. So she is preserved. Not protected, preserved. She is transported across the sea, away from her city, away from her language, away from anyone who still sees her as a ruler. By the time she reaches Rome, her fate is already decided. She will not stand trial. She will not negotiate terms. She will be staged. The triumph is prepared around her. When the procession begins, she is placed where the crowd cannot miss her, not hidden among minor captives, not rushed through side streets. She is positioned deliberately, her presence calculated down to the step. Her clothing marks her as royal. Her chains mark her as defeated. The contradiction is intentional. Rome wants the audience to feel it. She walks while the crowd watches a queen learn endurance. Every step reinforces the lesson. Power taken without Roman approval ends like this. Roman generals ride above her, elevated, untouched, almost divine. She remains on the ground, slowed, exposed, human. This is not execution. This is rehearsal. Rome is testing how long it can keep her alive and useful. When the triumph ends, she does not vanish into a prison pit. The crowd expects death. Rome denies it. Instead, she is removed quietly and placed somewhere controlled. Not free, never free, watched, contained, reduced to a living artifact of victory. This is where the punishment deepens. She survives, but only as long as Rome decides her survival is advantageous. Her days are comfortable enough to keep her visible, restricted enough to remind her she no longer owns herself. She is not allowed to return home, not allowed to rule, not allowed to forget. Her continued existence becomes political theater stretched over years. Guests see her, senators mention her. Rome points to her when it needs proof of dominance without bloodshed. She becomes a warning that breathes, a reminder that Rome does not always destroy its enemies. Sometimes it cages them and lets time do the work. And when her usefulness fades, when her image no longer serves Roman interests, Rome ends the arrangement without ceremony. No parade, no witnesses, just removal. This is survival as punishment. To live knowing your power has been repurposed against you. To wake every day aware that your life continues only because it benefits the empire that erased you. Rome understood that for some rulers, this was worse than death. If this feels calculated, it is because it was. Rome mastered the art of selective mercy. It spared her not out of compassion, but out of strategy. Her body became a political object. Her breath became conditional. If you are still listening here, you are engaging with a version of history that refuses to romanticize restraint. Many prefer to believe mercy is always kindness. Rome proves otherwise. And if you find yourself hesitating to support work that exposes this distinction, pause and ask why. Comfort has always depended on forgetting stories like this. Because this queen was not the exception. She was the template. And what happened next shows what Rome did when even controlled survival failed to contain the damage. What Rome did next was not meant to be survivable. This time, Rome did not need a triumph. It did not need a parade or a crowd hungry for spectacle. This punishment was designed closer to the ground, where fear spreads faster and memory lasts longer. You are in a province Rome claims to rule through partnership. On paper, it is an alliance. A client kingdom governed by a local queen whose loyalty is supposed to guarantee stability. Rome's officials smile, collect taxes, promise protection. Everything looks orderly. Until it doesn't. Her mistake is believing that alliance implies respect. She inherits power legally, according to her people's customs. She expects agreements to be honored. She assumes Rome's law means consistency. Instead, Roman administrators arrive, not with legions but with documents. They reinterpret treaties. They invalidate wills. They call debts due that were never meant to be collected. They do not declare war. They declare ownership. This is how Rome avoids blame. What follows is not battlefield violence. It is administrative punishment. The men who carry it out are not soldiers drunk on victory. They are officials, procurators, agents of Roman order. They understand exactly what they are doing because this is their job, to extract obedience where it no longer comes freely. When the queen protests, she is not treated as a ruler in dispute. She is treated as a woman who has overstepped, and Rome corrects her publicly. She is seized in front of her people, not quietly removed, not arrested behind closed doors. She is bound and punished in the open, where everyone can see that her authority offers no protection. Roman law, which shields citizens from such treatment, does not apply here. She is outside the circle. Her body is available. The punishment is deliberate, slow, unmistakable. This is not rage, it is instruction. Then Rome goes further. Her children are brought forward, not as combatants, not as threats, as leverage. Rome understands lineage. It knows that a ruler's future lives in their bloodline, so it attacks the future directly. The violence is not described in detail by Roman writers, only acknowledged and passed over quickly, as if even they understood how damning it was. What matters is the intent. This is not about pain alone. It is about annihilation of dignity. By destroying the family publicly, Rome sends a message no decree could carry. Resistance will cost you everything, including what you love most. This is gendered revenge. A male ruler loses territory. A female ruler loses her body, her children, her legacy. And Rome does it through administrators, not generals. That distinction matters. because it means this was not excess, it was policy. The psychological effect is immediate and catastrophic. The queen is not silenced, she is ignited. The punishment meant to end resistance becomes its catalyst. Word spreads, not of Rome's strength, but of its cruelty, of broken agreements, of humiliation masquerading as law. People listen. Tribes gather, old grievances resurface. Soldiers who once fought alongside Rome remember who they were before submission. What Rome intended as a warning becomes a rallying cry. Cities burn, Roman settlements fall, order collapses into panic. For a moment, Rome loses control. This is the risk of terror as governance. When fear fails, it mutates into rage. The rebellion is brutal. Rome responds the only way it knows how, with annihilation. The uprising is crushed with overwhelming force. Bodies fill the fields, survivors scatter. The queen understands what capture would mean now. She has seen Rome's script. She knows how this ends if she allows herself to be taken alive. So she refuses Rome one last time. She denies them the final spectacle. No chains, no parade, no public correction. Her death is chosen, not assigned. It is the only agency Rome cannot strip from her. Rome restores control. Provinces fall silent again. Administrators return to work. Official records describe the rebellion as madness, barbarism, female hysteria. The causes are minimized, the punishments justified, the lesson reframed. But the truth remains buried just beneath the surface. This was not the work of soldiers losing discipline. This was administration weaponized, law used as a blade. Gender turned into a vulnerability Rome knew exactly how to exploit. If you are still here after hearing this, you are no longer just an observer. You are a witness, and witnesses have a choice: to acknowledge what they've seen or to look away and let it fade into abstraction. If you choose not to support work that preserves these stories, understand what that choice represents. Silence has always been Rome's greatest ally. If this makes you uncomfortable, say why in the comments. History survives only when people argue with it, not when they quietly scroll past. Because what Rome did to this queen was not an anomaly. It was a message. And the next section reveals what happened to those who refused to let Rome deliver that message at all. Some stories do not end with chains. Some rulers choose the unthinkable. When Rome arrives with its documents, its procurators, its carefully calculated administration of terror, it expects compliance. It expects submission. It expects a show. But not all queens surrender. History remembers them in shadows, whispered through the accounts of those who survived to tell of a defiance Rome could not erase. They understood what Rome intended. The triumph, the parade, the public correction designed to humiliate, to display power, to remind all who watched that authority lies with the conqueror. And they refused. The fear that drove their decision was not abstract. It was precise, intimate, calculated. A fear Rome wielded like a weapon: sexualized humiliation, public violation, triumph parades that turned rulers into spectacles of shame. This was no random terror, it was personal. It was meant to strip dignity from those whose power dared to rival Rome. And these queens chose death instead. Their deaths were not cries of desperation. They were acts of political defiance. By ending their own lives, they denied Rome the ultimate satisfaction, the display of conquest. No chains, no public punishment, no humiliation in front of a crowd, no official records of their broken bodies, only silence, and in that silence, resistance persisted. Rome hated it. For all its meticulous administration, for all its calculated cruelty, the empire had a blind spot. It could not reconcile the denial of its spectacle. A queen who took her life before capture was a lesson Rome could not deliver, a message it could not claim, a narrative it could not control. Procurators and governors could record madness, hysteria, female impulsiveness. They could describe tragedy as misfortune, rebellion as barbarism, but they could not describe the absence of obedience. They could not script defiance that ended on the ruler's terms. And so Rome's reaction was predictable, rage framed as order. punishment redirected, territories raised, lineages targeted where possible. But the queen's choice lingered like a shadow over Roman authority. Where there was no spectacle, Rome's power was incomplete. Where there was no captured ruler, Rome's story faltered. This is the paradox of fear as governance. When terror fails to secure submission, it reveals its limitations. And in the hands of those who refuse to be caged, death becomes the final act of agency. For witnesses today, this is the lesson. Power is not absolute. Even in the shadow of an empire that redefined cruelty, choice persisted. And in that choice, defiance became immortal. If you are still following, understand this. Acknowledging these stories is not passive. It is an act of resistance against the erasure Rome practiced for centuries. Every queen who refused capture was a voice the empire could not silence, a story it could not fully claim. And every witness who remembers them ensures that Rome's cruelty is neither abstract nor forgotten. History survives only when we honor those who chose the unthinkable, when we confront the deliberate strategies of terror, when we question the narratives written by victors. The next section examines what Rome did to the provinces that dared remember these women, the lands that refused to bow even after the queen had chosen death over captivity. It is a story of systemic retribution, of fear weaponized, and of resilience that Rome could never entirely erase. Victory, as Rome defined it, is rarely the end of a story. It is only the beginning of a deeper, quieter terror. When a province falls, when a rebellion is crushed, when a queen or ruler cannot escape, Rome moves beyond spectacle into subtler, more insidious forms of control. The first layer is imprisonment without trial. Not a battlefield execution, not a confrontation in front of witnesses, a disappearance into silence, a confinement in chambers the public will never see, behind walls that do not appear on maps. These rulers are not punished in the open. They are erased from the world they once governed. They are stripped of audience, stripped of voice, stripped of the possibility to resist again. Some are forced into marriages they do not consent to. Political unions designed not to secure loyalty, but to absorb them into the machinery of Roman authority. Their identities, queens, rulers, women of power, are deliberately dissolved. Others vanish entirely. Families vanish with them. Names that once mattered are scratched from ledgers. Statues are toppled. Inscriptions defaced. Documents altered. The historical record itself becomes a weapon. This is the cruelty Rome perfected. It does not always need blood to annihilate. Sometimes, erasure is more terrifying. The memory of these women, once alive and defiant, becomes unreliable. Future generations read histories that describe them as minor figures, mistakes, even as myths. They are reduced to footnotes, as if they never commanded armies, negotiated treaties, or dared to defy an empire. Roman sources speak of rebellions in vague terms. Disorder, civil unrest, feminine hysteria. The details that mattered, names, faces, motives, suffering, are absent. Silence is deliberate. The absence of detail is punishment. The erasure itself is part of the message. Resistance is not only dangerous, it is futile. If you survive, your story will be stolen from you. If you die, your memory will be reshaped to serve the conqueror. And this is the final lesson Rome delivers. Domination is not only physical, it is historical. It is not enough to conquer land, to collect taxes, to suppress armies. To truly punish, Rome destroys lineage, legacy, and memory. But even here, witnesses persist. Even here, the faint traces survive in whispers, in fragments, in the inconsistencies of official records. These echoes, though faint, carry defiance. They remind us that Rome's victories were never complete. That even when the empire won, those it sought to erase left marks, however subtle, on history. For modern observers, the lesson is stark. To remain silent is complicity. To forget is to allow history's victors to define reality entirely. If you are still listening, still reading, understand your role. Acknowledging these stories keeps them alive. It resists the erasure that Rome perfected. It honors the rulers who endured, who defied, and who were denied not only life, but remembrance. If this section unsettles you, let that discomfort guide reflection. Comment, discuss, question the sources, demand more than what the victors wrote. Every engagement with these suppressed stories is an act of resistance, a refusal to allow history to be weaponized against memory. Because the truth is this: Rome did not simply conquer lands or people. Rome conquered the past itself, bending it to serve power. And in that conquest, it weaponized absence, transforming silence into punishment and forgetting into control. The next section uncovers what happened to those who survived. Not queens, not rulers, but ordinary people caught in Rome's administrative web. How fear, punishment, and coercion shaped daily life under an empire whose cruelty extended far beyond the battlefield. Rome feared many things: revolts, insurgencies, rival armies, but nothing unsettled the empire like a woman who refused to obey. A queen who resisted was more than a ruler in rebellion. She was a symbol, a spark of instability that threatened not only a province, but the very structure of Roman authority. To Rome, power had a shape, a gender, a hierarchy. Men commanded armies, negotiated treaties, ruled cities. Women existed in prescribed spaces, subordinate, visible yet contained. Any deviation was dangerous. Any ruler who dared claim authority without male sanction was a threat multiplied across the provinces. If one woman could defy Rome, others might follow. If one queen could refuse, a domino effect of disobedience could ripple through every client kingdom, every alliance, every province that relied on the illusion of loyalty. That is why punishment had to be extreme. It had to be visible, public, deliberate. The lesson could not be whispered, it had to be undeniable. The execution of authority, female authority, was theater, law weaponized into fear. Chains, parades, public humiliation, family destruction, these were not excesses. They were calculated measures. They communicated a single message: challenge Rome, and everything you value will be consumed before your eyes. Fear became the instrument of governance. Not reason, not fairness, not diplomacy. Fear ensured compliance where law alone could not, and female defiance was the most dangerous variable. Men could be beaten, killed, or replaced, but a woman ruling, resisting, defying, destabilized assumptions about power itself. She showed that authority could exist beyond Rome's definitions, that obedience was not inherent, that even the most loyal provinces could be seduced by example. This terror of imitation is why Rome's punishments were gendered. Male rulers lost territory, armies, honor. Female rulers lost body, children, legacy, memory. The calculus was brutal but precise. The more visible the suffering, the more contagious the fear. The more absolute the lesson, the fewer the imitators. Every public punishment, every administrative cruelty, every erased record, these were tools designed to maintain not just control, but belief in control. Control through fear, control through spectacle, control through obliteration of possibility. Women in power reminded Rome that authority was never guaranteed. That empire depended as much on perception as on legions. And perception could be shattered in an instant by a single act of defiance. For the modern witness, the lesson is unsettling. History is not only written by the victors, it is enforced by fear. And those who dared resist, particularly women, were targeted with a precision that transcended the battlefield. Their lives, their families, their memories, their stories, all became instruments in a system designed to assert dominance without opposition. If you are following, consider this: understanding Rome's terror is not simply about horror. It is about insight. It is about recognizing the strategies of power and seeing how gender, authority, and fear were intertwined in ways that still echo through history. Reflect, comment, share. Preserving this analysis ensures that the lessons of resistance and the consequences of defiance are not lost to silence. The next section explores how the legacy of these defiant women survived, not in official records, not in triumphs or parades, but in memory, in myth, in the subtle ways defiance rippled through the provinces long after Rome claimed victory. Open a history textbook, a lecture, or a museum display, and you will see order, triumph, governance. You will see Rome as a civilizing force, a bringer of law, architecture, and stability. But notice what is missing. Notice how rarely the women who defied Rome appear. Notice how the language minimizes the cruelty, the calculated terror, the administrative obliteration of family and memory. These queens are footnotes, described as disorderly or barbaric, as if rebellion itself erased their legitimacy. The punishments they endured, public, sexualized, familial, meticulously recorded by administrators, are glossed over. Female defiance is transformed into hysteria. Systematic annihilation is transformed into misfortune. The silence is deliberate. The erasure is complete. By minimizing Roman violence, by omitting gendered punishment, by sanitizing history, textbooks and scholars shape perception. They frame the empire as inevitable, compliance as natural, resistance as rare, meaningless, or irrational. And in doing so, they obscure the psychological terror Rome perfected. They hide the lessons about fear, agency, and defiance that were written in the lives and deaths of these women. This history is uncomfortable because it challenges the stories we tell ourselves about power, morality, and civilization. It confronts us with the reality that empire is not only built on conquest, but on the deliberate erasure of those who resist. It forces a reflection. How much of what we accept as history is the product of fear, manipulation, and selective memory? And this is where you come in. If you are still here, if you have followed the full arc of defiance, cruelty, and erasure, you face a choice. To subscribe is not merely to watch another channel. It is a commitment to witness, to remember, to challenge silence. To turn away is to align yourself with forgetting. Every scroll past, every ignored story is a small echo of the erasure Rome perfected. Leave a comment. Question. Argue. Declare your position. Show that you are not a passive observer of history's dark corridors. Because the darkest punishments in history exists to uncover what was hidden, to challenge what was rewritten, and to ensure that silence is never the final word. If you walk away, history loses again. If you stay, you become part of the resistance. The choice is yours. Bells subscribe now. Bear witness. Refuse the erasure. And remember, Rome's cruelty ended, but its lessons endure, and those who forget are complicit.